Well, 4 indictments in 4 months. It's tough to do. Good morning. It's great to be here on KCMO Talk Radio. Want to welcome on a guy who's got the pulse of what is happening in the state of Georgia right now. Very popular talk show there on WSB. He's also syndicated as well across the country. Erick Erickson. You can catch him at erickericksonshow.com. He's live every day, 11 to 2 Central Time. All right, Eric, Georgia, the reaction on the ground has been what? Good morning.
Well, no riots, no crimes. Thanks for having me, by the way, Pete. It's kind of befuddling. So here's the problem that people need to realize. This district attorney in Fulton County is already doing a criminal RICO trial against a gang called Young Thugs. They haven't been able to pick a jury since January. It's August, and they've still got 6 to 8 jurors left to pick for that, and that's going to be a 6-month trial with the most experienced judge who moves the fastest. So everybody here is like, how is this going to work? There's no way this trial happens in like the next year.
Mm-hmm. Well, I saw that she said she wanted a trial starting by, she said 6 months, which would take us to almost Super Tuesday. Ish.
Yeah.
So you think that there's no way this trial starts in the next 6 months?
No, I don't see how. When it's taken 8 months to pick a jury in this gang RICO case, how on earth are you going to be able to find a fair and balanced jury for the former president of the United States in less than a year? That and just the overwhelming sentiment of it. Look, they could, because she's charging Jeffrey Clark, who was at the time in the U.S. In the Justice Department, they could actually move this to federal court because he was a federal federal executive officer at the time, as was President Trump. And federal law says if you sue a federal officer in state court, it can be pulled out of state court and put into federal court.
Wow. Okay, so there's obviously a lot of layers to this whole thing. That's the legal layer in terms of a timeline on this. Politically speaking, I mean, I look at this from afar and I'm sitting here and I'm saying, okay, nothing that Trump said about Georgia has ever been close to proven true. At the same time, there clearly appears to be political motivation here. So how should we in Kansas City square this thing and what's happening there in Georgia?
It is absolutely politically motivated. She's trying to make a name for herself. Her team is even fundraising off of it for her re-election campaign, which is 4 years away. So yes, it's political, but because it's political doesn't also mean there's not a legal issue that they're going to be able to pursue. The downside for the DA is she's got the newest judge in the circuit overseeing the case, and he happens to be a longtime Republican that Brian Kemp, the Republican governor, appointed. So she's not going to be able to get her way on everything she presumes she would.
Okay, that's an interesting development here. What's the most concerning thing from Trump's perspective based on this indictment? Is it the call with the Secretary of State that's now infamous? Is there something else in this indictment that is most concerning from a legal perspective for him?
Yeah, so I was a RICO lawyer in the state of Georgia, and essentially you can tie together a bunch of unrelated crimes to a single idea, single conspiracy. And the conspiracy is that Trump wanted to steal the election. The problem for Donald Trump in a RICO case is there were these individual idiots in the case who did really dumb things. For example, showing up at an election worker's house to intimidate her. And they've lumped all this stuff into this criminal enterprise. So even though Donald Trump didn't know these people were showing up at this witness's house to intimidate her, even though he didn't order it, it's still part of the overall criminal conspiracy that can be attributed to him in this effort to steal the election. So they essentially are tying things he had no control over to him, which is perfectly legal in a RICO case.
Wow. Erick Erickson, WSB in Atlanta. He's also syndicated as well. Find him on Twitter. Just look up EW Erickson. That's ERICKSON. So, Eric, now moving forward in this case for Donald Trump, I mean, there's been a lot of noise on social media that we've all heard from people with different agendas here. Is this something where Donald Trump, when you stack up the 4 indictments as of the last few months, where does this fall in to the list of where he should be concerned when you compare it to New York, when you compare it to the Mar-a-Lago documents, and then, of course, the recent federal one on the 2020 election?
I actually think it's the second most serious. So the most serious one is the Mar-a-Lago case, because it's a statutory crime of compliance, which it doesn't look like he complied with, which makes it a pretty easy case to prove, assuming you can convince the jury. This case is the second most serious because it's a state case in Georgia that has the broadest RICO statute in the nation. Third would be the Jack Smith D.C. case. I think that the Alvin Bragg case is going to get thrown out by a judge. I see no merit in it, and even most Democrats concede that point at this time.
But what I'm hearing from you as well, and something you said earlier, is that Brian Kemp, who, of course, Donald Trump is no fan of there, despite the fact that they're both Republicans, his appointed judge may be Donald Trump's best friend over the next several months in this case. Is that right?
Yeah, look, the guy's a very straight shooter from what I know of him. He's got a really pristine reputation, and he was also kind of put into the Fulton County judicial circuit to kind of clean it up. At the time, the DA who, prior to this DA was there, was a guy of questionable ethics, and so putting a former inspector general for the state in as a Superior Court judge was a way to clean it up. So, I mean, both sides have a very fair judge, and I actually think that helps Donald Trump, given the way the DA has tried to rush this through.
And there's no play here. There's no role for Brian Kemp in any of this when it comes to the DA or any pardon powers or anything of that nature?
No, despite what you may read online, the governors in Georgia don't have the power to remove district attorneys, and they don't have the power to pardon. So he's completely removed.
How is this playing politically, by the way, just in terms of where Trump is at in a state that obviously loves Brian Kemp, so they like Republicans? Where are they at on Donald Trump as a candidate? Because that state is going to help decide who's in the White House in 2025.
Yeah, this is ultimately the problem for Trump is Republicans in Georgia, though he leads in the polling here, are genuinely exhausted by all of it. And so I think this continues that exhaustion, which encourages the party, particularly suburban white voters who lean Republican but voted Biden in 2020. It gives them an incentive to try to move on.
And that's the case in a lot of those, suburban counties, Cobb County, right, places like that down there outside of Atlanta?
Yeah, Cobb, Gwinnett, Forsyth, Cherokee County, all major Republican hotbeds, but those suburban areas are where Biden and even Stacey Abrams started to do well, and they're just really exhausted and ready to move on. So relitigating 2020 again just gives them even more incentive to move on.
We'll see how it plays out. Erick Erickson, last thing, Eric, just nationally speaking, is there anybody you're seeing, whether it's DeSantis, anybody else that has a chance, or do you think that this Trump nomination is inevitable at this point?
I don't think it's inevitable. It's still soon, and there's a lot of baggage. And honestly, he's being bled dry by the lawyers, rightly or wrongly. His campaign is having to pull money back from other places now to pay his lawyers. So DeSantis still has more money in the bank. Tim Scott's money is surging. I'm kind of interested in how a lot of DeSantis voters have shifted towards Scott. I would keep an eye on both of them.
All right. Erick Erickson does great work down there on WSB, but also does it across the country. The Erick Erickson Show. Eric, appreciate you joining us in Kansas City. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You bet.